The Haunting of the Island of the Dolls. Deep in the remote waters off the coast of Mexico lies a small, desolate island, forgotten by time and avoided by locals. The island is unmarked on most maps, a place that only the most foolish dare to visit. Known only by a few ancient souls as La Isla de las Muñecas, the Island of the Dolls, its reputation is steeped in blood, curses, and whispers of unspeakable horrors. It is said that once you step foot on the island, you never leave the same. Some say the island is haunted, others that it is cursed, but the truth is far darker than anyone could ever imagine. Julian, an ambitious journalist looking for his big break, heard the rumors about the island and couldn't resist the temptation. He was desperate to document the obscure, to capture the unknown, to expose the supernatural. He found a local fisherman willing to take him to the island despite the warnings. The island appeared as if it had been forgotten by the world. The dense foliage and thick trees stretched high into the sky, their twisted roots clawing at the earth. A heavy mist clung to the ground, wrapping the island in a choking embrace. The air was stagnant, damp, filled with the smell of rot and decay. The fisherman dropped Julian off at the shore, muttering something under his breath in fear before sailing off, leaving Julian alone. Julian took his first steps onto the island, immediately feeling a shift in the atmosphere. It was as if something was watching him, something waiting. But he pressed on, his ambition outweighing his unease. That was when he saw them. Dolls. Hundreds of them. They were everywhere, hanging from the trees by frayed ropes, scattered on the ground, wedged between branches like grotesque ornaments. Their eyes were made of glass, and as the wind stirred, they seemed to follow him. Their faces, frozen in eternal expressions of horror, were disfigured, some with gaping mouths, others with cracked faces, their paint chipped and worn. Julian's heart raced, his curiosity piqued. He approached one doll hanging low from a branch, its delicate porcelain face cracked in half. Its eyes were so lifelike, their gaze so intense, it almost seemed as though it was pleading for help. He reached out to touch it. And that's when it happened. The doll's head jerked. Julian recoiled, his heart hammering in his chest. The movement had been so sudden, so unnatural, that he wondered if he was imagining it. But as he stepped back, he noticed something even worse. The other dolls, the ones hanging from higher branches, twitching slightly, their heads shifting to lock their eyes on him. Their mouths, once sealed shut, were now opened, as though whispering to each other in dark, guttural voices. An overwhelming dread washed over Julian as he turned to leave, but the island had other plans. His footsteps seemed to echo louder, the trees creaking with a sinister life of their own. The wind whispered something unintelligible in the distance, and suddenly the air grew colder, almost freezing. Then, from the shadows of the trees, a figure emerged. It was a woman, haggard, disheveled, her long black hair matted with dirt. Her skin was pale, almost sickly, and her eyes were hollow, devoid of life. But what caught Julian's attention was the doll clutched tightly in her hands. It was like no doll he had ever seen before. It was huge, unnaturally so, its body deformed, its eyes wide with terror. And worse still, it seemed to be staring at Julian, its eyes following his every movement. The woman opened her mouth, her voice a rasping whisper. "You shouldn't have come here. You should leave. Now!" But Julian, in his arrogance and fearlessness, ignored the warning. He demanded to know why the dolls were here, who had placed them, and why the island seemed so alive with evil. The woman's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "This island is a prison, and the dolls are its inhabitants. They are the souls of the cursed, those who have come before you, and those who will come after." As Julian took a step back, he felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around his ankle. He screamed, looking down to find a doll clinging to his leg. Its fingers, stiff and sharp like broken twigs, dug into his flesh. The doll's mouth opened wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth as it snarled at him like a rabid animal. Julian kicked at the doll, trying to free himself, but it only tightened its grip, pulling him toward the ground. As he struggled, more dolls began to crawl from the underbrush, their twisted limbs snapping as they dragged themselves across the soil. They climbed up his body, digging their nails into his skin. their mouths opening wide to bite into his flesh. He fought desperately, tearing the dolls from his skin, but the more he struggled, the more they came. Soon, they swarmed over him, their weight pinning him to the ground. The woman watched, her eyes cold and distant, as Julian screamed in agony, his body being torn apart by the dolls. Their teeth sank into his flesh, gnawing and ripping as they devoured him alive. His cries for help were drowned out by the sound of their relentless gnashing of teeth and the sickening squelch of tearing flesh. His vision blurred as the dolls began to consume his body, the once pristine porcelain faces now smeared with his blood. His last thoughts before the darkness took him were of the woman's final words, "Now you're one of us, forever." The next morning, the island was silent. The mist had cleared, but the dolls remained, swaying gently in the wind. Among them, there was one new addition, a large doll with ragged clothes and bloodied hands. Its glassy eyes blinked once, slowly, and its mouth curled into a horrifying grin. And as the wind howled through the trees, the faintest of whispers could be heard, almost drowned by the rustling of leaves. "Join us!" The fishermen, who had once dared to venture close to the island, no longer went near it. It was said that the spirits of those lost to the dolls now roamed the island, waiting for the next victim to take the place of their soulless, decaying bodies. No one has seen the woman since Julian's death, but there are those who claim to hear her voice in the night, calling out from the mist, beckoning lost souls to join the cursed dolls on the island. The island of the dolls stands still, abandoned but never empty. It waits for its next visitor. And the dolls, they wait too.